We are live. Good to see you today, my EOS Podcast friends. I have something you've all been waiting for. We have Angelo, and he's coming to us all the way from Austria. And we're going to learn about EOS and PrivEOS and just what's going on in the space. So, Angelo, welcome to the show, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm pretty excited to be here. So I'm Angelo, and as you said, I'm part of the PrivEOS team, and so we started last year working on it shortly after EOS was launched, and we're pretty excited about the project because we think privacy for applications on a blockchain is a very, very important topic.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is something that people have been talking about so much. It's really cool to see it start to come to EOS. The first question I always start the show with is, what is most interesting to you in EOS right now? So what is that?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer because there is literally so much going on. It's hard to even keep up. You can watch the news all day about EOS and you still wouldn't be, you would never be finished basically.
Yeah, for sure.
But what recently caught my mind was the PrivacyCoin that announced, the PrivEOS coin that was announced, and we both projects have privacy in their names. So our name is PrivEOS, so Privacy EOS, and their name is PrivEOS, and they are producing a privacy token, a privacy coin, similar to Monero. So it's not so much about protecting data that apps are collecting, which is our goal. Their goal is to create like a token, and that you can transfer between people, and where it would not be visible to the outside who is sending from who to who and the amount of money that is being transferred. So this is something that would be private only to the participants. And this is a very great idea to bring that onto EOS. And it's pretty exciting also for us because it means that anything basically that improves the privacy potentially of people using EOS also helps us, because we are sort of taking care of the data layer, but our focus is not token transfers. Right, so it's actually great to have something like this on EOS.
Yeah, that is really exciting. And just to be clear, the PrivEOS is basically a privacy token, where PrivEOS is a software layer for private data. So there's a clear difference there. So regarding PrivEOS, which you brought up, is something really interesting. I think that is very, very interesting, because if we do think about hopefully using EOS more transactionally, if we want to purchase or make a lot of exchanges with it, you do want to eventually have that privacy layer where everything you do isn't tracked for all time on the blockchain for everyone to see, and not because there's anything nefarious going on there, but just because it's going to give you the opportunity to do what you want with your data. That control over data is one of the big visions here. So that really opens the door for that. That's going to be nice.
Right, and data is everywhere, and due to the fact that computers are so ubiquitous in our everyday lives, they're basically in our pocket the whole time. They're tracking our location. All of our mails is on Gmail. So like in everyday world, whatever you do, you are leaving all this data pollution, producing all this data pollution without even thinking about it. And it's at the moment, it's centralized companies collecting and storing all this data?
Yeah, I was just looking into, I just got the WeChat app because I have someone I'm talking to in China, and they said, well, you know, basically their preferred method is WeChat. I was so surprised when I started looking into WeChat. They're, you know, 1 billion users, and they do so much on WeChat. They're doing they're paying their bills, their utility bills. They're buying movie tickets. They're buying airplane tickets. They're train tickets. They're communicating. They're doing video chat. They're sending, you know, gifts to each other. I mean, there's online dating. There's like so many functions. Basically, you use this WeChat app in China to do almost everything. You can go, you know, you're going to go buy your coffee with it. That's a centralized service that all that data on everyone is being collected and kind of collated in some way. It's just, what an interesting thought. And then I thought, well, I mean, Google kind of does the same thing here. It's a bunch of different kind of companies collecting. It's not all under one umbrella, but still, yeah, the amount of data that we put into the world about ourselves is mind-blowing. And right now there's no real kind of too nefarious of a use for it, but you kind of want to get ahead of that, because who knows what that looks like in 20 years, you know? So
yeah, I mean, some regions in China are showing where we could be in a couple of years.
Yeah.
I don't know if these reports are true, but there's this region in China where they have this sort of reputation system for everybody, where you can see, like, basically, do you know this one Black Mirror episode where where you need to rate everybody? Mm-hmm. They basically have this system.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have seen that as well. I think by 2020, they're trying to implement it more broadly, but I haven't really looked into, I mean, I would imagine there's some validity to it. I would guess. I haven't done enough research on that, but it sounds pretty wild. Yeah, that Black Mirror episode is definitely, could be the future, depending on how we handle these next 5 years or so. So that's kind of a cool segue into PrivEOS, what your team's doing, which is securing data and giving us a layer for private data. So why don't you tell us kind of what PrivEOS is first, and then we'll get into it a little bit.
All right. So PrivEOS is you can think of it as a dApp for dApps, but not only for dApps, but in general also for companies that are not necessarily blockchain companies right now. But in its simplest form, what it allows you to do is it allows you to create read permissions on a blockchain. And you can use it for several things. You can use it to keep data private, in the sense that if you have personal data, private data of users that you want to work with in a decentralized way, you can do that with PrivEOS. But you can also use it anywhere where you need, like, read permissions. So let's say you have a piece of data in a decentralized system on the blockchain, and you want to make sure not everybody can read it outright. So you can, for example, implement a smart contract that says anybody who has paid 1 EOS may read this file.
So it gives a read permission is basically some sort of criteria for people who are going to query or ask for that information. Not just anyone can come see it. There needs to be some permission level. That's what you guys are enabling, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this permission layer is freely programmable by the application. And we have a smart contract protocol that you can put into your own smart contract, where every time somebody requests access to a file, we're basically, like, calling this notification action, and you can have your own logical checks in there to determine if a user is allowed to access a file or not.
Okay, so this is the secure data storage layer is one of the big tools that developers on EOS would love to have right now. It sounds like you've put it out there. Has anyone started using it yet, or how far along is it?
Yeah, so we launched on the Jungle testnet a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
We have around 24 BPs collaborating with us on that network right now. So there are like roughly 20 nodes online at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal is to launch with 30 nodes on the mainnet.
Mm-hmm.
But the nodes we have right now are already like enough to do some serious testing.
Okay, great. What is what's the BP's? What is the BP's incentive to run nodes on that on the PrivEOS network?
Yeah, so first of all, it's of course an important piece of infrastructure for the EOS blockchain. So there's that, but of course it's also a way for the BPs to make some additional money, right? With the bear market and everything, Dan Larimer has said that the BPs should diversify their income by offering additional services, and PrivEOS is one of those services.
Yeah, this is a topic that's come up with the history nodes as well, where there's these services that are really important to the EOS blockchain itself, and that their kind of block producers are stepping in. It differentiates them in some way. Like some of the crypto lines, there's a good example of a team that runs a full history node in Grey Mass, EOS Canada. I forget, there's a couple more.
EOS Sweden, I believe.
EOS Sweden. Mm-hmm. And it's a great differentiator. So like teams that are providing that node, that's just one thing. And then there's this thought of possibly, I saw this in EOS Weekly, so shout out to EOS Weekly for giving such good information so consistently. There's this thought of this next layer. I forgot what the block producer, like this, them becoming service providers for dApps. And would that be a possible
liquid apps?
Yeah, liquid apps. Would liquid apps be a possible way that you have block producers producing for you as well?
Yeah, there hasn't been like too much detailed technical, at least not as far as I could see, information on how it actually works. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I think they made an announcement that they're going to launch something next week on the EOS mainnet, so we might not have to wait very long. But of course, if there's a BP who's running a PrivEOS node, there's nothing preventing them from also becoming a DSP on liquid apps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting time to be building things because everything's being built at once. So as you're building, you're thinking of possibly using these tools that aren't built yet. So it's like it makes the puzzle a little bit more interesting as you try to grow. So back to PrivEOS a little bit. Can you give maybe a real world or example, or kind of a simple example of how this would be used by a dApp, so that just an easy way for people to think about it?
Yes. So just an example application. So we all know how Twitter works. And Twitter has this nice feature that you can set your tweets to private. So you can set your Twitter feed into a protected mode, which means that your tweets that you're posting are not visible to everyone, to the whole internet, but only visible to your followers that you are explicitly approving, right? So this is a feature that is possible in a centralized system, of course. And with PrivEOS, we can implement the same thing in a decentralized system, with the added benefit that those tweets that are now protected with PrivEOS, not even the service provider that is running this application, not even they have access to the data, because it's fully like point-to-point encrypted. And we have in fact built like a demo application that shows exactly this use case.
Yeah, that is a game changer. That's been one of these things that people have talked about, and I've used the term black boxing your identity, basically having control over your identity and your information and letting it out to the places that that you see fit. And this is definitely sounds like that first step of, okay, here is, for example, all the tweets that I'm sending out, but I don't just want that information just pouring into the world. I want to have some sort of direction over where it goes. What's that start to look like down the road as far as the rest of your data? If all the apps you're using maybe are using some sort of this technology or this software?
Yeah, so the possibilities are basically endless, and the use cases for PrivEOS are basically endless, because I think any non-trivial application sooner or later has data or is starting to collect data that is or can be considered personal data. And you know, we have legislation in Europe, the GDPR, and so on, that really puts the screws upon like companies who collect data and who are not like compliant with data protection laws in Europe. And there is legislation coming to the US as well. So there's now in California, as you might know, a similar law as the European GDPR. So it's something that affects everyone building on blockchain, and it's also affecting people, not normal companies.
Can you tell us what GDPR is and what that entails?
Yeah, so GDPR is European legislation that came to effect in May last year, May 2018. And it basically lays out rules for companies who are collecting data, what they're allowed to do with the data, how they can process that data, certain rules, how you need to deal with data processors that process data for you. So if I'm sending out a newsletter using a newsletter sending service like MailChimp, for instance, there needs to be a clear agreement between me as an application that owns, that has this data. So I'm a data controller in the sense of GDPR, and this company that I'm sort of sourcing out this data processing to, the data processor. And there are lots of rules and lots of bureaucracy around it. And it also specifies quite hefty fines for any mistakes you make. So for instance, if you have a data leak, you can get fined for it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It sounds like then down the road, there's this possibility that PrivEOS is a kind of a business-in solution, because it can eliminate some of those hurdles for if instead of having to collect all this data, you can almost just offload that onto the blockchain. Well, the blockchain has it; these people can keep it private themselves. I'm not actually handling it. Do you see that kind of bigger picture as companies really wanting to use this, so they don't even have to deal with it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're just at the beginning of this transition, and of course, GDPR has been good for us in that respect, because companies are slowly realizing that any data that they're collecting and storing is also a liability. Yes, because hard disks are cheap. storage space is very, very cheap. So in the past, before legislation like GDPR, it has been very, very cheap for companies to collect as much data on the users as possible. There was no price other than the hard disk space attributed with storing that data. But now there is. So there is, you really need to think about what data you're storing. Is it really necessary that I store this data? And all these kind of things. So, and you know, I personally think that GDPR is not the best legislation in terms of it's not like very well executed because it came out last year, but it has nothing in it about blockchains, for instance.
Okay, yeah. What it does is, even though it doesn't have things about blockchains, it takes the first step in changing the incentives a little bit, because that's the concept that you're talking about there is just basically this freedom to collect as much possible data as you can. You create this giant honeypot for hackers with no incentive to necessarily keep it safe besides some like bad publicity that everyone's already getting anyway of getting hacked. Like, so yeah, there's not that much downside. People or companies just collect as much as they possibly can, have this giant honeypot, and just hopefully it doesn't get hacked, which it will eventually. So, yeah, so putting some sort of negative incentive towards doing that, or some sort of skin in the game, like if you don't protect this, then there's a negative consequence. That's a good first step. It is, I'm sure it is kind of scary on the for people on the free market end, thinking of how that restricts some companies in some places and not in others, which is tough, because there's places like China where that's part of what they're doing is collecting data. And so what happens when full countries have unlimited amount of data to work off of and interpret, and then other places don't? That creates a little bit of a existential question, I think. But hopefully we'll see. I don't know. That's just a random thought. I like to go on tangents sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And what's actually great about things like GDPR? It may be a pain in the ass for companies to implement it, but for the individual, it's actually a good thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So for the individual, for the data subject, it's actually a good thing. It's about empowering individuals. And actually, I had a talk with a GDPR lawyer the other day, and he said, if you look at if you read like the Bitcoin white paper, it's about the same thing. It's about empowering the individual, taking power away from banks and corporations and governments, and moving that power onto the individual. And GDPR, whether you like it or not, it's good for the individual.
Yeah, that's something I can definitely get on board with. Is this? It feels like this has swung so far to empowerment of big corporations and big faceless entities, and now each little piece of this that we kind of start giving back to the individual is a beautiful thing. So yeah, that is definitely a good part of it. Definitely. So a little bit on that note, what do you think it looks like? I like to look down the road again a little bit with the user experience, let's say, for the individual, where a lot of, maybe I choose to use only blockchain applications. Is it kind of every app that I'm using, I'm choosing where my information goes, or is it maybe one centralized place and I say, I want all my things private? What do you think? How do you envision that user interface for people when they're controlling all their data? I mean, there's a lot of data that you're controlling for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. you know, what I see with businesses that are building on top of PrivEOS, what it allows you to do is to build what I like to call a zero knowledge service. And what I mean by that is not that it uses zero knowledge proofs to move a coin from one person to the other, like a cryptocurrency like Zcash does it. What I mean by that is that the company operating this service that I'm using the service, the customer is using the service, but not even the company knows what it is you're doing exactly. Because all this data is point-to-point encrypted between one user and the other. And so this, I have to sort of explain this a little bit. So what it means is, for me as a company, it's a good thing for once. So because I'm not collecting all this personal data, it means I don't have this cost associated with dealing with this data. So that's a good thing from a liability standpoint. So I can sleep much better at night if I know that there is not a centralized database that I'm operating somewhere on a server, on a MySQL database that has all this personal information on all these customers out there. You get hacked at any point in time. And we all know IT systems are not always perfect. So, but it also is a challenge because many business model of many companies is that they want to sell customer data, right? So we have we actually have a solution for that. So what PrivEOS allows, I mean, this is not implemented as version 1.0. This is sort of down the line. It's a future module that is on our roadmap. But what PrivEOS allows is, let's say you have a private data set. Let's say all the tweets by users. And this is like a private data set that you cannot look into. There's a way to perform some computation on this data and extract, let's say, statistical data. For example, you could look at all collective users and say how many users are from which country or from which zip code or things like that. Things like that don't reveal anything about any individual users. Yeah. So PrivEOS will have something that allows to extract this kind of statistical information on a data set without compromising the privacy of any individual users. And this allows companies to sell the data, but since everything is like on a blockchain, they need to be very transparent about it. And companies that are just selling the data and are not like rewarding the users in one way or the other for it are gonna have a tough time competing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's how I see it.
So is there a kind of a difference there between private data and kind of bigger anonymous metadata? Are those I mean, is there a big difference there? Is that something are people worried about their private information going out, or are they worried about like big companies having so much metadata that they can target market? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So you mean the problem of metadata? So in general, what you always have when you use encryption. So for example, when we are chatting over Signal, which is it's a messenger that uses encryption. There's a secure channel between the two of us, and we're chatting, and an outside observer doesn't know what we are writing about. They cannot read what we're writing, but they know that we are communicating.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so if they're watching the traffic, they can analyze, okay, there are data packets going from Angelo to Brandon, from my IP address to yours. So you can sort of, you're leaking some knowledge, right? And this is a problem that is not easily solved by just using encryption. And in blockchain, you have the same problem. When one person makes a transaction with his EOS account, you don't really know whose account it is. So you just see, okay, there's a transaction from this EOS account, and they're maybe sending a coin to, or like an, so for example, I can transfer money and I can encrypt the memo, for instance, yeah? So only this other person can read it. So I don't know what's written in the memo, but of course I know that person, like EOS account A has sent something to EOS account B. And this is something that I can observe from the outside. And I think the way, there are approaches to deal with that. And this will probably lead us too far away, but there are things you can build or implement on top of PrivEOS to help the privacy of in this situation, to help with the privacy.
Okay, cool. Now you mentioned so let's say that I've kind of secured a lot of my, well, the apps, I guess, are securing a lot of my private data, and I'm choosing where to let that go. Now I've possibly collected, let's say I've got 5 years of my personal data with all these apps that I'm using. In the future, do you see that being a personally searchable database? Like would I have my own personal metadata? Is that a possibility at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends on the design of the application. So I don't think there will be like a central place where you could look at all the data from all your applications, because they would have to cooperate to do that. I mean, maybe there will be something like that. I don't know. But in the first version, it would be each application individually. So the way, like if you build an application on top of PrivEOS, the idea is that the user himself always has access to his own data. And it's also a requirement of things like GDPR that the user needs to be able to download all of his data anytime he wants.
Yeah, that's great. So let's bring it back a little bit here, because I love thinking so like into the future. As far as PrivEOS goes, you're in testnet right now. This is going to be, so you got the block producers are testing it. When do you think it'll come out of testnet, and what's the initial functionality going to look like?
Yeah, so the initial functionality will be this key management, the smart management of the private keys that allows to implement read permissions. That's what we just discussed. It will also allow you to implement, to create decentralized applications on a public blockchain like EOS, while at the same time being compliant with data protection laws like GDPR. Yeah, because you can start collecting data from customers and store them in a secure and safe way within PrivEOS in a privacy-preserving way, which helps a lot in becoming compliant with things like GDPR.
Is it can other blockchains use it? Will it be chain agnostic, or the technology?
Yeah. So we are launching sort of our first blockchain that we're launching on is EOS. But we are in fact blockchain agnostic, so it's a technology that works with potentially all blockchains, and we could even run it with the same set of producers or block producers that are providing services now. They could connect to the EOS mainnet They could connect to EOS side chains and sister chains. They could connect to application-specific side chains. And if you have a smart contract running on an application-specific side chain, provide this functionality there. Works on sister chains like Telos. But of course, it could also connect at the same time to a chain like Ethereum or Tron and provide the same service there. Of course, there are differences between all these blockchains that need to be accounted for. And it will, of course, take some development to account for these differences, but it can be done. And that's also why initially we are implementing multi-chain functionality first for other EOS.io-based chains, and then for other chains like Ethereum or Tron.
Nice. Well, that'll be that'll be great for the space. That tool just in general puts this extra little piece that developers and that can use that adds a lot of functionality. So, and I was just talking about this with Nathan James the other day, that it seems there's so much space within the blockchain world. I was talking specifically about EOS, Tron, and Ethereum. All of the chains can succeed in their own way. They can all build dApps. They can all do interesting things. If blockchain's expanding into the world, there's so much space to expand into. It doesn't, there's not some sort of competition there, really. I mean, the competition will be for, who's creating the most interesting dApps that are kind of adopted. But it's not a zero sum game right now, let's say. So the fact that your tool can go out and be used to help Tron and Ethereum maybe build some really interesting stuff and push blockchain forward is pretty awesome. That's cool. It's fantastic. So what is next on what's your near-term roadmap look like? Have you released that yet? And kind of what's next on the board for your team?
Yeah, so we are preparing ourselves for the mainnet launch at the moment. So we have built a couple of applications ourselves. So because it's always good to eat your own dog food and to really understand how different use cases would be using our API. So we've been improving our SDK so that it's easier for developers to use, we are implementing things like multi-chain support, so we can launch on other chains like Telos from the get-go. There's things like this storage layer that we briefly, I don't think we've actually talked about it yet. So if you store data, let's say on IPFS, for instance, the problem is that there's no way to make sure that data gets deleted from it once you're done. And so for very sensitive data, even though it's encrypted, you might still want to delete it. Just in case the encryption key gets compromised at some point in the future, you don't want this data to be lying around on IPFS still. Yeah, so, and for this little bit of extra security, we're going to provide a storage layer where you can actually store a file in a decentralized way, but with the ability to delete it when you're done. So things like this is what we're preparing. And then also we are aware that this is a security sensitive thing. So it's a client server system. We have servers operating, or actually not we are not operating any servers ourselves. I should maybe clarify that. So what we're so the role of our company, which is called Slant, is that we are a software development company, basically. So we are developing this open source software which is PrivEOS. And we're giving it basically for free to the block producers. And they can then launch these nodes and provide the service to the blockchain. Yeah, so that's basically how it works. And we are structuring PrivEOS as a DAC, so as a decentralized autonomous community. So we as a company, we will not have control over the final product once it's launched on the mainnet. We will hand over the keys to the block producers basically, and there will be like a multi-sig permission system, so that changes can only be done when like a majority agrees, because you wouldn't want a centralized company like ours to be in charge of a smart contract like that. Because that would kind of defeat the purpose. And if we want people to trust PrivEOS that they can really like use it, build their application on top of it, there can't be a single centralized company that controls the smart contract or the system in any way. So that's why we're structuring it as a DAC.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how your DAC is structured and what that looks like? Because I know there's, that's just an interesting topic. I love to hear about DACs. So. Yeah.
So we are kind of pursuing the keep it simple, stupid approach of a DAC. So we're not looking at employing. So for example, EOS DAC has developed this excellent DAC management software that they're using with the ability to have custodians and voting. You can vote for custodians and all this kind of stuff. And we might transition at some point to something like that, to a more complicated system. But initially, we want to keep it simple and just use multi-sig functionality to manage the DAC. So there are, for instance, what we could do is. So we have a token that we are using internally in the DAC, so as a DAC token, and there will be 1,000 tokens, which is not a lot.
That's right? How companies issue their shares, though. Generally, is a company will issue 1,000 shares and split them up. Generally, it's to start. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's a company share, because that's not necessarily true, but I would say it's a DAC token.
DAC token, yeah.
And so the important members of the DAC will get these tokens, and then you could, for instance, say one token is one vote, or you could have like a multi-sig threshold system where you could say we need a threshold of 600 from 1,000, and then if you have like 100 tokens, then your vote is worth 100, something like that.
Interesting. So then you guys, excuse me, your team then will propose direction for the DAC, and then everyone has the opportunity to use their tokens to vote on the blockchain, it sounds like, as to the direction of each decision.
Yeah, I mean, anyone can really propose a change, not only us. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So the way we see ourselves is, first of all, we will continue developing the software. So there are, as I mentioned, many future modules that we have planned that are in the roadmap. And the second thing is, while it's a very, very useful tool for dApps, we don't want to stop there. So we want to provide additional services on top of the very raw PrivEOS infrastructure layer for companies that are not necessarily blockchain agnostic. And for instance, a company might need a contract on paper with someone. I think you stopped moving. Are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here. Are you looking on my back? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So where did I leave off?
You said that a company may want a contract on paper.
Right. So they might need that. They also might need a real invoice from a real company.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not a decentralized business, you might need that, for your audit. So we see ourselves also as a service company to the DAC, and we will be able to facilitate real world business.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how we see ourselves. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's a teams who are starting DAX right now. It's a really ambitious goal, and it's there's so much. I mean, because it's brand new, so you're having to kind of invent the wheel as you go. Yeah, exactly. So we are while we appreciate the ideology behind like fully decentralized DAX and everything, we are sort of taking like a realistic approach to a DAC. By saying, okay, there's this DAC which is like 100% decentralized, but there's also going to be like a service company, like a company in the real world that helps with real world business. What's the thought on? So there's initial custodians. How do you go from? Because we talked about making our a DAC as well. How do you go from this initial set of kind of maybe token distribution for the DAC within like a team, and then how do you go from there to possibly like distributing tokens to custodians or that? What do you have an idea on how that transition looks? Yeah. So we have, the usual thing, like 10% of the tokens are for the team, 10% of the tokens are for reserved for investors. Then there are 20% of tokens are reserved for the service company, for the DAC. And the rest of those tokens are reserved for the block producers who are providing services. Okay. The block producers who will be chosen to be part of the DAC, they will get these tokens for free initially. So we will basically distribute these tokens, but they are not like 100% owning those tokens, which is very important because we need these block producers to remain accountable. Yeah. Yeah. So they can keep these tokens for as long as they are in good standing. Okay. For as long as they are producing for PrivEOS, for as long as they are operating a node, as long as they are sticking to the rules. So there's a service level agreement and all this kind of stuff. So they really are need to be doing their job really to remain to keep these tokens. So that's an important thing that we decided to have. And should there be there's always this menace sort of, or this threat in the background that should you be not conforming to the rule, should you not do your job, that the DAC can take these tokens away from you. Okay. But cool. It's really not much we are asking from the block producers. I mean, the only thing that we're asking basically is that they operate their node, a reliable, secure node, and that they give feedback on the direction of the software development from time to time. Cool. Well, kudos to you and your team on pushing forward the DAC model, because that's another cool thing that we see coming out of blockchain, and so that's awesome. You mentioned the storage layer, and you kind of hit on it there. Can you talk a little bit more about how that works? It's the ability to recap what you said. It's the ability to have a piece of information that's stored in a storage layer, but just temporarily, you can't actually delete it. Are you actually deleting it off of the blockchain? It sounds like maybe it's a layer on top of the blockchain so that it can be deleted. How's that work?
Yeah. Yeah, so now it's a little bit more into the technical details. So with what we have right now, which is sort of like 1.0 of PrivEOS, which is just smart key management, the permissions, we are not actually providing storage for the actual data. So what is being stored in PrivEOS is just the encryption keys.
Okay.
Yeah, so if I'm building on PrivEOS right now as an application, I still need to decide where I'm going to store the encrypted data. So I can encrypt the file, put it on PrivEOS, the decryption keys, but then I need to decide where I want to store the data and the encrypted data. So I could store it on IPFS, for instance. I could store it, even if I want to, on a centralized company server, or on something like Amazon Web Services.
Okay.
Yeah. If I want to store it in a decentralized way, IPFS is basically your best option. But GDPR mandates the right deletion, the right to deletion of the file. So a customer can request any time that his data should be deleted. And so what you can do right now is we can make the encryption key or the decryption key inaccessible. So that if you delete a file, basically the encrypted file will still be on IPFS, but the encryption key is the decryption key is basically gone. So nobody will be able to access it. For some or for lots of applications, this might just be enough level of security. But in terms of GDPR, encrypted data is being regarded critically. So it would be better, it would be even more compliant with GDPR if there was a way to actually delete even the encrypted file. Even though the encryption key is already gone, if you could go ahead and delete the encrypted file as well, that's an additional layer of security. And for sensitive data, this might be just worth doing. And besides, there is currently no such thing as EOS storage on EOS. So there is no way for an application, for a truly decentralized application, to truly easily use IPFS. So this is also something that you pay a little something for some kind of storage that the PrivEOS network would provide, with the additional function feature that you can in fact delete it.
Okay. Well, so because if you still have the encrypted data on blockchain, is the thought that as computers advance, computing power increases, that or maybe even supercomputers will be able to decrypt that someday, so the encryption is kind of maybe irrelevant 10, 20 years down the road?
Yeah. Things like these are exactly what you need to think about if you have like really, really sensitive data. So if you're worried about either the encryption key leaking at some point by a user, for instance, or you're worried that encryption might be broken at some point in the future by the NSA or whoever, then you would be better off if you could make sure that the file is deleted when you want it to be deleted.
And I think I missed that part. I heard that that you have a way to possibly delete the keys. Did you say that you could actually, the solution to possibly delete the actual data? I missed that part.
So to delete the actual data, you would have to store it in the PrivEOS storage layer.
Okay. Cool. That is, these tools like this are so, they seem small, but they have like this big overarching effect that kind of changes a lot of the dynamics of everything. So it's fun to think about and learn about this type of thing. So we talked about the initial permissions that PrivEOS is going to enable, and that it's on the testnet now, and then in the future, the storage layer. Is there anything else that we glossed over or haven't mentioned about PrivEOS to give people a better understanding of it?
Yeah, so we kind of mentioned also the ability to perform privacy-preserving computation on a secret data set. Yeah, so if you want to extract statistical data over a data set, right? So this is also one of the modules that will be coming in the future. Yeah. Then we are also thinking about an identity layer that is truly decentralized, and the idea is, I mean, it's sort of similar to what Scatter is doing with what's the name again? Scatter,
Riddle, maybe.
Scatter Bridge.
I think. Scatter Bridge, exactly.
Which helps applications to onboard users that don't have an EOS account yet, so log in with their email address and password, and there, as far as I understand, their service is slightly centralized, at least in the beginning. And we're actually looking into providing something like that in a fully decentralized way and privacy-preserving way on top of PrivEOS as part of like an add-on to the protocol. So we have that. We have the privacy-preserving computation, and potentially also things like verifiable off-chain computation for smart contracts, so that you could have a smart contract that is verifiably executed off the chain, and then the result of this computation would be played back onto the chain, and you wouldn't know what the calculation was doing. You wouldn't see that on the chain, and it would allow to use encryption procedures inside of a smart contract, things like that.
What would a use case for that be?
A smart contract. So let's say you have some data stored in PrivEOS. The application on the client side, the user, the application that is running in the browser, this application can access the data. Yeah, but the smart contract itself cannot base decisions on data that is stored on PrivEOS at the moment. So you couldn't say, for example, if you had a data stored on PrivEOS that says how old the user is, that is encrypted, you couldn't have a smart contract function that says, if the user is older than 18, do this or that. You would have to do this on the client side, basically, at the moment.
Okay. So it gives the ability for the apps to use that data in a smart contract, but still keeping it private because the computation is done offline, out of the way.
Precisely.
Okay. So I mean, it's almost like the DApp can now query and use this information, but not know what how it's been used. Okay, wow, that's getting deep there, man. That's amazing. Okay, cool. And then the Scatter Bridge was really interesting. I was just talking to Nathan recently, and their approach is to they're going to store the private keys securely on their own, and so they're going to be, like you said, semi-centralized in the beginning. They're going to have a cap on how much EOS you can hold. Their vision is that right now, to get more adoption, we need the same type of login that you can log in everywhere else. Like if you just say log in with Facebook and it creates it for you. So they want to, you hit a button, log in with Facebook, you have an EOS account, you're using Scatter, you're using EOS, then they're going to be essentially storing your private keys for you. once you get to a certain threshold of EOS, they won't let you just hold it like that because it's not secure enough, and they will kind of force you to have an account. But the idea that, and the evolution of that is clearly some sort of secure private way to do this, so that for example, Scatter doesn't have to hold these private keys for these minimal accounts. How far along on that solution are you? Have you started working on that, or does the team just kind of have an idea of that in their head right now, or where's that at?
This is sort of in the research stage at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
This idea. Okay,
so by 2025, we'll make sure that way you don't have any pressure on you.
Luckily, in the EOS community, things happen much quicker.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Well, if we apply the one day is almost a month in EOS time, then hopefully before 2025 sometime. Yes. But that way you have no pressure on you. But that's a really cool one. I'm excited for that. Wow. So there's a lot going on there. Was there any other pieces that we haven't touched on yet?
No, I mean, I think that's most of it.
Well, it's a lot. There's a lot there. So we've got I don't even want to try to recap. That's an amazing amount of things going on. So right now we're looking forward to the testnet, some of the BPs supporting this and getting those initial permissions and this tool for developers to use. It's going to be huge. And then we will watch your team grow from there. It's exciting. Do you have, where's the best place for people to find you, or what's the best action that kind of users can take at this point to be involved?
Yeah, so if we're looking, of course, now to inform the developer community on what it is exactly that PrivEOS provides, so if you're a developer and are interested in building on top of PrivEOS, it's best to join probably our Telegram channel. So if you go to our website, slant.li, I'm sure you can put it in the comments below, like in the description below. There's our Telegram link hidden somewhere on the site, and there's also a link to our developer portal, which is just a wiki on GitHub, where we started to put together all the necessary developer information, how to get started developing on top of PrivEOS, how it works, also the code to our example applications that you can refer to. And if you have any questions, we are very active in our Telegram group. So if you have any questions whatsoever, just drop a question in there, and if we're awake, we will most definitely answer pretty much immediately.
Great. So so we're looking for developers at this point, and I will put your links into the show notes. So anyone listening to this that wants to get involved or use the tools, check the show notes, and we will go from there. On my end, this is the EOS Podcast. It's not just a YouTube show. It is a podcast. That's why it's called the EOS Podcast. And that way you can listen on your way to work or commuting, or maybe even at work. Who knows? And I also have a proxy for a block producer voting proxy. So mrhappymoney is the name of the proxy, and I interview block producers. I've been interviewing block producers and teams since before the mainnet launched, and I'm well versed in what all the block producers and teams are up to, and I vote accordingly. So if you don't know what to do with your vote, mrhappymoney proxy, I will make it happen for you. And that is the show today. Angelo, it's fantastic to have you on, man. I really appreciate what you guys are doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep. And cheers, my EOS friends. Until next time on the EOS Podcast, have a good day.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is, and your time is.